Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, January the 22nd. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack Show. We've got a guest, Richard Atwell. We're going to be talking about sewage treatment, and we're going to be showing a quick video clip. And Richard, why don't you just introduce it?
The video clip is from a forum that we had on the 14th of January, and it was put on by Andrew Weaver, and we had a sewage expert there, and I was there. And we gave a presentation, and then we entertained questions from the audience. And the clip is some of the reaction from the audience when I asked them a question. Do you think this CRD plan is insane?
Okay.
Again, when it rains, the biosolids can be washed into any nearby water course and returned to the ocean, the very place they weren't supposed to go in the first place. So a quick show of hands, who thinks this is insane? And I call this the billion-dollar transputation system because it just moves it around. It's an expensive partial solution that relies on dilution, the very system that we're trying to replace. It is based on secondary treatment, which relies on the ocean dilution, and is also based on the wrong sludge technology. It creates a new problem of sludge rather than solving an old one.
The Oak Bay News carried a story since this happened at the Oak Bay Rec Center. And I'd say there was a lot, didn't reflect exactly my take on the issue. Richard, I don't know what you want to say about what's going on, but it's a bit of a mess.
Well, let's talk about the event. The event was well received, and what we'd originally done was, I shouldn't say we, but Andrew Weaver had invited the CRD, the Cetera program that's in charge of this project, to come and be a panelist, and they declined. So Andrew thought that was the end of that. And then during the event when we were taking questions from the audience, I was sitting on the panel, Jeff Young, Victoria Councillor and CRD Director, stood up and complained that he wasn't invited to the event. So it seems like he didn't get the memo from Cetera saying that they'd declined coming. But it's hard to tell who's in charge at the CRD. Is Cetera in charge? Is the CRD board in charge? It sort of goes back and forth. It's very convenient.
Yeah. Jeff Young criticized. Now, what was presented, very importantly at that forum, was a different plan that seemed to be doing a better job at much less cost. So we're talking about the billion-dollar sewage treatment program. Someone introduced a plan that he said would do a better job at much less cost.
Yeah, the cost is substantially cheaper, and you get the cost down by limiting the piping network that you need to get the sewage to the ocean. If you have a very high level of treatment, you don't need to send it all the way down the long pipes to Clover Point and get rid of. And this has been the flaw with the CRD's design all along, is that they always were designing upon a low level treatment process, the minimum standard that the government was going to put in, and then that forces you to get it to the ocean. It doesn't cost much more to go to a higher level of treatment, and then with other technologies you can actually reduce the cost wholesale on top of getting rid of the pipes, right? So you do need some kind of piping. You do need to get rid of the water somehow. You need to discharge it. But if you go down to Dockside Green, you see, where do they discharge the water? Into the ponds, right? They actually discharge it in the environment because it's safe enough to go into the environment. So they don't need a long marine outfall to get rid of it.
Which is absolutely huge, and in my view, because right now they're talking about pumping the sludge up to the Heartland landfill. And they're stockpiling sludge up there right now, I think.
That's right, yeah. It comes from the Saanich plant.
And there's always some discussions about perhaps even burning the sludge. And I don't know how far down the road that is, but that's in our, right up by where I live. So I'm going to be getting possibly all the sludge from all of Greater Victoria. And they're going to pump it up to the top of the watershed, by the way, which is like, and it can now trickle down through the whole watershed again for us to suffer again. So it's a really bad plan, I think.
Well, the incineration isn't a good idea at all, right? You've got the emissions to deal with, and if you go to Europe, you'll find technologies and you'll see standards that will keep the air clean. But the regulatory framework we have in Canada is not very good. So companies are going to build to the minimum standard. That's typically what happens. And then, an incineration process is a heat generating process. And what do you do with the heat? There's very few customers for that heat up there.
The important point is that we can do better. We can do much better than the CRD is planning for us. I just want to mention the names of the city councillors that have been most maybe at the forefront of pushing this ahead. And I think it's been Mayor Dean Fortin of Victoria,
Right.
Mayor Frank Leonard of Saanich, and who else? I'm not that familiar with.
It's the others at the CRD table, you know. It's Judy Brownoff from Saanich, it's Vicki Sanders from Saanich, it's Susan Bryce from Saanich, it's Leif Vergelin from Saanich,
Okay.
and then at Victoria, we've got Ben Isett,
Yeah.
he's been voting that ahead. We've got Marianne Alto, she's been voting it ahead. But I'll tell you that she has some concerns about the plan, and she's putting something forward at the next CRD meeting to try to make some repairs to that, give us some more time to get a better
So
project.
these are our city councillors. Phone them up. Phone up the CRD. This is, I think we're making a big mistake here. Richard, one last comment. We're out of time.
You know, there are better ways of doing this, and the hard part is getting the CRD to do it. And so what's come out of the community is a petition. It's at sewagepetition.ca, and it's a community petition asking the provincial government to do an independent review of the project. When we have Jeff Young standing up at a forum saying there's no other way to do it, prove it. Submit it to an independent review.
Thanks very much for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. We're back with the Walter and Jack segment. So Walter, what's number one on the list?
Well, I'd like to do a little smart meter report, a little discussion on BC Hydro's new smart meters. I was just talking to a woman by the name of Faye Kemp from Coquitlam, and she just received her new bill that now she's being billed through the new smart meter program, and she received a bill for $11,000 for her hydro consumption.
11,000.
11,000. And basically, Hydro said that when they swapped over her meter, they realized that the old meter wasn't reading correctly, and they estimated that she owed them $11,000. Now, she has a small house. I called her this morning just to clarify some of the facts. She has a small house. Her average utility bill was $226 a month, which is, not low. But she also uses natural gas for heating. So, I know through you look at heating calculations in houses, that she was paying, a fairly high bill already, given that she wasn't using electric heat. And then all of a sudden, with the new smart meter, BC Hydro's decided that she owes them a whole lot of money. Now, there's a lot of stories like this, Jack. We hear about them every several days, somebody getting some really enormous bill, not just like $1,100. You go, wow, that's big, but $11,000. And she's quite worried and afraid, and she's wondering whether she's going to be able to pay this bill.
I cannot believe what BC Hydro is doing, and virtually in complete secrecy. Because I've heard about these stories too. There was a story in the paper months ago, which is when I heard about it, and it was people's bills, their monthly bill, just going up by 50 or 80% or doubling. People were having to leave their apartments because they couldn't afford. This is, you can almost hear the jackboots drumming in the background because people need electrical power. And Hydro is a monopoly, and they don't give a damn. I'm sure if she doesn't pay and these other people don't pay, and yet the rest of us don't even know about it. It's being done in virtual complete secrecy.
We could always go to our elected representatives and ask them to defend us, except that the Liberals, the NDP, and the Green Party all seem to love smart meters. So I don't know how much sympathy we're going to get from our elected representatives on this. But I was going to ask you, Jack, is it okay for people to write in to you if they have their own stories about this very, very high bills, just to keep us informed as to if they, let us know that if they're getting these high bills, we could find out about it.
Yeah, why not? My email address is at the bottom sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody wants to do that, just send us the story. Also, Walter, I think a lot of people are we never hear the stories, but people, I think, are being physically impacted, health-wise, by not only the smart meters, but the entire this radiation attack on us, because it just keeps going up. Are people are people having health impacts?
Well, they are. I mean, I get reports of that all the time. And at first I was wondering, really? That many people are making, have complaints about health problems and a whole range of health problems. Some starting out with just sleep disorders, and then sometimes skin rashes, sometimes heart palpitations,
Ringing in the ears?
ringing in the ears. This whole list of symptoms, and you kind of sit back and say, well, how could one source of pollution, let's say, cause that? But there's a lot of evidence that this type of exposure, this type of radiation, will cause these different symptoms.
What are the main, in our homes or in our communities, what are the main generators of this radiation? What's the correct name of it?
Well, it's radio frequency radiation. That's the technology at all.
Cell phones.
Cell phones
Wi-Fi.
used to be the big sinners, let's say, the cell phones, because you put that radiation right by your head. But now with wireless technology in the home, like particularly cordless phones, particularly DEC-type cordless phones, which is really high source of radiation, and wireless routers for computers, very high exposure. And the thing is with them is that they're firing all day, all night, 24/7. So if somebody's living in that home and not leaving that much, they're going to get a direct exposure over a long period of time, and that's been shown to be very detrimental.
So there are things people can do, namely get rid of those things in your home. Can you run through the list again? Cell phones is number one, but everything.
Well, if I always tell people, if it's, how do you spell wireless? Is DANGEROUS. If it's wireless, it's dangerous. It hasn't been proven for safety that we think these products should be proven to. You just simply know that if it's not hooked up by a cable, then that energy is traveling through space and is traveling through your body at the same time. So it's not good news, and I think there's going to be a lot of suffering before we finally change enough minds to
Yeah, and if anybody's smiling when Walter uses the word suffering, I think, I don't have any reason to think this, but it is what I think, that this issue is going to be the same as smoking. Yeah. All the pain and suffering and death and cancer that we now know is caused by smoking, you go back 40 or 50 years, hey, that smoking's safe, the doctors said it, the scientists said it, the government said it, everybody said it, and they knew it wasn't true. And this wireless radiation, in my way of thinking, is exactly the same. And after some point in time, they won't be able to keep the lid on it anymore. But they're doing their best because there's money to be made. And the corporations that are making the money own the media, and they control the politicians, and that's why this is happening to us. And all the people who are using it and think, yeah, well, I used to smoke, but I was smart enough to stop, and we're going to have to stop this as well.
Eventually, Jack, we're going to have to get a handle on it. I mean, we can reduce the level of exposure dramatically. These devices don't have to blast out quite as much radiation as they do in order to function. They could operate at 100th of the signal strength and still do what they need to do. But moreover, because there's been no safe lower threshold of exposure, and if they said if you get under this level of exposure, you're going to be safe, there hasn't been any lower level set yet. So basically, we're being foolhardy if we're just using this technology without knowing the full health impacts of it.
Yeah. I was wandering around last week and thinking about, just the general state of the world. And I think a lot about media, and it came to me that, I even wrote it down, the media, I think one of the media's jobs is to create a picture of the world for us, and they sell that picture to us on television, on radio, and in their newspapers, and books and magazines and movies as well. But the whole picture is a lie. And if we don't start to get around their lies and see the reality of what's going on, and it's already really too late, but for the vast majority of my life, it never occurred to me how deep the power of the media is and was, and at what level they manipulate us. And I think it's almost total now. You know, like, I mean, take any issue, genetically engineered foods. Well, they never mention that. So, you know, that's on the back burner. Fukushima, they never mention that. That's on the, you know, I wrote down the coach of the Vancouver Canucks was suspended for a few games because of an outburst. And, you know, that event, the fact that he got suspended, I would say has gotten 100 times more coverage in 1 week than Fukushima and genetically contaminated foods and half a dozen other things, like climate change, for example, than they get in a year. I mean, the media is completely out of control. Who do they work for? You know, you got to ask that question, and they sure don't work for us.
Well, and it's not just the media. You know, what I'm just as concerned about is what happens in our schools and our universities, and what's being taught, what subjects are being taught, how are they being taught, what approach are they taking to science, the very, very uncomfortable, cozy relationship that our universities have with corporations and doing research. I really think that most research is done at universities to keep real research from happening, real truthful research. Corporations don't have to be at universities funding research. We could be doing that ourselves, but they go in there and take up that space. And then they teach our kids to look at problems in a very, very narrow and blinkered fashion. That's another huge problem, Jack. You know, it's part and parcel with the media. The media is another leg of this monster. And it's very hard for if our kids are all going to go to university and get their heads filled with all this nonsense, you know, how do you get that out of them once they get out of university? So we're into a lot of problems with information in general, getting information.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of university students, I mean, there are so many who come out of university or college massively in debt. And, I mean, that is the plan. It's not happening to you by accident, and it doesn't only happen to the student, but it happens to their family, and it happens to their future. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that is the plan for you. I mean, why do the corporations want a Canadian society anymore? I mean, it's important to us, but for the corporations, what they want out of Canada now is natural gas, and oil, and probably very soon our water, and food. They can grow a lot of food here. And do they really want the Canadian people standing in their way? And you know, you look around and you watch our society slowly being attacked and damaged and weakened and kind of destroyed. And I don't think we do it to ourselves, so there has to be a force that's making it happen. And to me, the power force in our country is the corporation.
Yeah, but they're not locking us up in prison yet.
Yet.
So, I mean, we still have freedom to express ourselves. We still can go out and act. We can still, you know, we can talk to our fellow citizens. We still can do things. And I think having that big picture is important, but I don't think we should be too burdened down with it. We should just move ahead, try to make good things happen wherever we can, you know. But I think there's a very pervasive and powerful influence right now on the information systems, and it's a big roadblock.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, if we want to move to solutions, and solutions are certainly important, I guess we should all be, as you said a week or two ago, contacting our politicians and trying to have some impact on them. You know, knowing we have to realize that, you know, it's going to be a long, tough row to hoe, and maybe impossible because they just don't care. They're getting their orders from elsewhere. But, you know, keep in mind, you know, we've got to build a media. We've got to promote democracy.
That's right.
Yeah. If we can do those things, to me, those are the things that are going to move us ahead.
Yeah.
Bats or somewhere else?
Well, let's stay on this theme a little bit, because, you know, I was reading more about Edward Snowden and the National Security Agency and lately, and they're talking about where Snowden's going to go and all that. And I've been looking at that case, with taking everything with a grain of salt. And I always wondered what's going on with Snowden. And I always asked this question: Is he himself an operative of the elites of the same forces that you're talking about? And it occurred to me that the national security agencies had the ability to, basically what they say right now is they can surveil everyone all the time. That's what they claim. All your emails, all your telephone calls, all your cell phone calls. Now with smart meters, they can watch whenever you turn on your bathroom light or whatever. So they got that power, but people weren't really getting it. Now they have Snowden leaking this information. Now the world knows that we're being watched. Now the NSA and those guys have a lot more power over us because we're now afraid of them. And fear is a primary motivator in behavior, as you know, and a motivator not to act, not to be engaged, to kind of stay below the radar as best you can, and not to fully participate in society. I think it's a very dampening effect. So although I'm not certain about Snowden, I'm concerned that maybe he may have been knowingly or unknowingly an operative for them.
Yeah. On that one, I don't go there, but you may be right. I mean, it's certainly it's in the field of play.
Yeah. Did you have another topic? Because I did want to touch on the bats and the bees.
Okay, before you talk about the bats and bees, I'll talk about the cars.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of cars just in this little city is absolutely phenomenal. I think if we want to look at the number one thing that is destroying our planet, it's probably cars more than anything else. We can do better, and it's up to each and every one of us somehow to reduce.
No doubt. The last thing that I was just touching on is I've seen some articles written about North American bats dying. And they have a name for it. I'll see if I can find it here very quickly. They call it the white nose syndrome. But the bats are basically being killed by a fungus as they hang in their caves or wherever they are at. Now, it looks a lot like the colony collapse disorder with bees. And this is very curious that it looks a lot, the bees are dying from a fungus and all that. And what we have to remind ourselves of, and as we touched on before with electromagnetic radiation, that bees and bats are very specific species that rely very heavily on the natural radiation in the environment in order to navigate and to find food. Particularly with the bees, they use their sensors are the radiation in the environment tells them where the food is, where the pollen is and everything. So it all seems to be a mystery why the bees are dying. It seems to be a mystery why these bats are dying. And nobody's really looking at this potential cause, which is that we have too much electromagnetic radiation in the environment. Just basically we have a whole lot of man-made radiation that's overwhelming the natural radiation in the environment. That's a fact. It's millions and millions of times higher than it was in the natural environment before man arrived. So I'm thinking we better urge these people to get looking at this situation. Maybe we can reduce the radiation in the environment.
Well, we'd sure better. I mean, it just is too much. And I mean, I don't know where the leadership is going to come from. I mean, you know, really it's up to us. And we did it with smoking. Maybe we can do it with these things.
There's a profound level of denial going on with our leaders, with our political leaders. They certainly are not looking for the truth for the most part. They're not being good citizens. They're not exercising their good judgment. They're following their marching orders from their parties or from whoever, and they're not seeking the truth. And I think all politicians have to wake up here and use their brains and forget about what party policy is. We all have to do that.
Thank you very much, Walter, and thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to Citizens Forum, being filmed on Wednesday, January the 22nd. I'd just like to thank our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that make this all happen. Our guest in this segment is Chris Cook. Chris has a radio show on CFUV Radio and is the editor of PacificFreePress.com, which is a pretty great website. We've got a few things to talk about, Chris, and we'll start off with Site C and California wildfires. Now, some people may not even know what Site C is, so maybe you can just...
Well, the Site C is a huge dam project. It's a proposed project, which is really important to remember. It's for the Peace River. It would be, should it be built, it would be the third major dam put on the Peace. Now, this one is faced a lot of criticism and a lot of resistance. It would flood, just thousands and thousands of hectares of land up there. But the land up there that it would flood is really some prime farmland, some of the best growing land in British Columbia. Now, this is problematic as we've become accustomed here in BC to getting our food from California. Well, that we can't rely on forever. So as you mentioned, there's been the biggest they're having a century drought down in California right now, these massive wildfires. What's going to happen if BC's connection, our easy, cheap food connection to California is broken? This has always been a big issue.
I mean, because California can no longer grow the food because of the heat
Or
and drought.
because what they can grow, they want to keep, or they can't afford to transport it, or it becomes so expensive by the time it gets up here that we can't afford it,
So what we should do then is flood some of our best farmland in order to provide power to the Christy Clark's crazy idea that our future is fracked natural gas.
Well, before that, we should get rid of the agricultural land reserve, though, because we want to make sure that we can't grow food down here as well. I mean, we don't want to starve slowly. We should just do it all at once, right? And this is the other thing that the Clack government, or did I say that, is up to as well. They're moving to get rid of the agricultural land reserve, and this protects some of the best farmland in the whole province, definitely down in the Lower Mainland and over here in the
Now, I
island,
haven't
too.
heard, that sounds important, but I really haven't heard that they're talking about getting rid of the ALR.
Yeah, this is an ongoing thing. Somebody dropped this bomb, a month and a half, 2 months ago, and the policy hasn't come right forward yet. But this is
What's the bomb?
well, it was a whisper campaign to see, a balloon to see, what would happen if they said, "Oh, we should have some changes to the agricultural land reserve." And hey, pardon me, Jack, why don't we put it under the control of the BC Oil and Gas Commission? I mean, they know lots about the agricultural land reserve. They know about taking care
Now,
of
certainly
that.
nobody was whispering that.
Well, I mean, this was the idea that was floated. Now, I'm not sure how far that's progressed right now, but this seems to be a common theme in this country. How closely the Liberal government here is, philosophically at least, to Mr. Harper's Conservative Party nationally. Well, they decided that the fish habitat should be put in the hand of the National Energy Board. Where pipelines and such are going on, it's better that the NEB take care of that rather than the Ministry of the Environment, or the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. What do they know about
I
fish?
haven't heard this either. So what?
Yeah, well, this is a new thing. They squeezed this one out a week before Christmas. And they said, we'll have a few changes here.
And what is the change?
Well, the idea is that the National Energy Board, who oversees energy matters in this
Who just
country,
approved the Enbridge pipeline? Those
that's
people.
right. And it was at the same time that they announced that and announced this huge LNG bonanza, 7 massive LNG projects that they were going to okay.
Okay, so the NEB, this group, is going to have some say over environmental protection?
Where it concerns fish habitat along pipeline routes, this would be the purview of the National Energy Board, where in the past it would be an environmental question.
Now, we were talking about John Tortorella in the last segment, the coach, coach of the Vancouver Canucks, just been suspended for 5 games. And I guess that suspension got 10,000 times the amount of coverage of what you're just saying, but somehow what you're saying sounds about 10,000 times more important.
Well, I would say 1 million and something. But then I never did like John Tortorella. But no, well, this is the symptom of our country in this time. Maybe not even only our country. It's the great age of abrogation. Governments don't seem to want to govern anymore. Mr. Harper, he seems allergic to Ottawa. And the government here in British Columbia, you know, what did they sit last time? 35 days or something?
And does
like
it even
that?
matter when they're there?
Well, I don't know. Well, it matters to me that at least that, you know, I mean, keep up the facade for God's sakes, you know, at least, you know. But yeah, regulatory bodies don't want to regulate anymore. You know, well, we'll just fire all of our fish inspectors and let the National Energy Board do it. I mean, you know, who cares, right? You know, and now John Tortorella, he doesn't want to be a manager anymore. He wants to go and get into punch-ups off the ice, right? I mean,
Yeah. So, I mean, it seems like our entire democracy has been stripped from us because I don't think people want this, but what we want doesn't matter anymore. The government now governs directly for the corporations, I think, and we're seeing. I mean, you know, it's one thing after another. With Site C, they're building the dam.
well, not yet.
But yeah,
It's
they're-
still it's
right.
proposed, right?
And it's going through a hearing process right now.
Right.
And I think it's very important that those hearings be held in Victoria and in the Lower Mainland and in the right throughout the province, because this Site C dam, if they build it, is a massive step towards changing the direction of this province, because the power is going to go to fuel the liquefied natural gas industry. It means fracking, this horrible poisonous process that Christy Clark is so enamored with, and which the NDP also doesn't oppose because both of them work for the corporations. It means all the energy from Site C is going towards that. And we don't even have a say in it. This is happening today. These hearings are taking place in complete secrecy. The media doesn't report on them. The politicians of all parties seem to support it.
Well, the fracking in this, you know, natural gas or liquefied natural gas, it's frack gas is what I call it, right? Now, these 7, and there's more project approvals to come apparently, but these 7 approvals that were announced just before Christmas, you know, and people are going to be forgiven for not hearing about it, they're equivalent to more than all of the gas produced in Canada right now altogether. Just these 7 projects would more than double the amount of fracked gas produced in this country.
The politicians are insane, and they must have been totally corrupted, and the media too, for keeping it all secret. Have you got any brilliant ideas about what we can do about this stuff?
Do I? Oh, well, I've always fancied moving south of the border, but way south, you know, maybe Venezuela or somewhere, or Brazil would be good. I don't know, Jack. I mean, you know, I guess you just got to keep going to the ramparts and raising your voice. But as I say, it is this age of abrogation where, you know, governments don't seem to govern and regulatory bodies don't seem to regulate. And, you know, we are at the bottom of the pecking order. And I guess that's where we should be, because people haven't, it is up to us, after all, the citizenry, to put these people's feet to the fire and to sit in the road if we have to. And that's not happening in this country because, you know, life is still pretty good for Canadians, and it's the only thing I can think of. They don't get out. Half of us don't even vote, don't even bother to vote, you know, and I can understand that. I can understand why they don't,
But, you know, time and again, brave Canadians on hundreds of different important issues do stand up. I mean, you know, just a couple of nights ago, somewhere on a video, the video was about genetically contaminated food, and it was a very scary video. And Dr. Shiv Chopra was in it. Yeah. And most people in Canada have never heard of Dr. Shiv Chopra. He's a Health Canada scientist who was fired because he wouldn't do what the government told him to do in approving these poisonous foods to be put onto everybody's dinner plate. They fired him, and at least 1 or 2 other scientists at the same time. The media completely covered up the issue.
Well, in this country, maybe. Canada's famous around the world in the scientific community for these muzzlings. You know, this has not gone unnoticed in other places, and people in other countries, they're appalled. They can't understand what happened to Canada, what's going on over there. But yeah, the Chopra was the first of them to come out, and he came out early and stood his ground.
There was a story in Common Ground magazine a couple of months ago of a federal scientist whose job it has been for decades to be the chief spokesman for the Government of Canada in support of genetically contaminated foods. Now he's retired, and his story is exactly the opposite. He's saying they're dangerous and shouldn't be there. And once again, the media is completely silent. Canadians don't know about it.
Well, and also just before Christmas, the government slid in more approvals for fish farming, and they said they were lifting a moratorium, which I didn't realize there was a moratorium. But so that's going to be more fish farms, endangering habitat further. I mean, there's this Trans Mountain pipeline that we've talked about here before. David Ellis over on the mainland there. This is the pipeline that goes from Edmonton down to Vancouver to Burnaby. It runs over some really difficult terrain over the Coquihalla there, and it's already busted at least a few times. It's a 60-something-year-old pipeline. Now Kinder Morgan wants to run a parallel or several parallel pipelines along the same route, and they're running bitumen down it, which these not only are they old, but they weren't rated for this heavier stuff, right? This is a disaster that threatens the Fraser River. So we might have salmon farms and no salmon in the Fraser anymore, one big spill, and this is what David Ellis fears,
I think that's the plan. I think they want to get rid of the wild fish, because if you look at what they're actually doing, they are getting rid of the wild fish by allowing these fish farms, for example, and more of them as the years go by. I mean, why would our governments do that? Why? It makes no sense. The only way it seems to make sense is if you say, yeah, let's get rid of the wild fish, because then who's going to control the entire fish industry? It will be a few corporations that are farming them. People used to be able to go out and get fish, but they're going to take that away from us. The corporations are just totally out of control, and they say absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you look at what the corporations are doing and have done, they are absolutely and totally corrupting everything. And it's up to us. There's nobody but us.
Well, you got to fight, yeah, and you got to strengthen government. I'm often amused by people who say, "Oh, I hate the government" and all this, and they spend all their energy, denigrating the only power that will protect the citizenry. I mean,
yeah, democratic government.
We're really lost.
That's it. Democratic government. That's what we can work for and fight for. And if us citizens push for it, I mean, we're up against the power and might of the corporations and the power and might of the politicians in the political world. But there must be some out there that are, I mean, I don't know who they are, but
Well, Jack, I had a conversation with Greg Palast, a great journalist, American journalist, gregpalast.org. You can check out his site, or .com rather, I'm afraid. But Greg's done a lot of work on pipeline issues, and his big one was pig in a poke, where the pig is this thing that they send down pipelines. It's all got computer operated, and it goes beep and boop, and it runs down, and it's supposed to check the integrity of all the welds and everything. And it works terrifically when it's programmed to work. But the oil industry, Greg found, they don't want it to work because it's real expensive. If it finds cracks and things that has to be done, it costs a lot of money. So they just tweak the programming so that it doesn't find the things that it was designed to find. There's the pig in the poke. But he said to me last night, if you're looking at fracking, because I keep saying, Greg, for God's sakes, come and help us in BC. But he says people all over are saying that to me. And he says, I'm an investigative journalist. I dig for stuff that isn't visible. But all your stuff is on the table. It's all there. It's just nobody's doing anything about it. It's up to you guys to do something about it. And, my job is digging up the stuff that isn't obvious, But one thing, a very instructive thing he told me, he said, when it comes to pipelines, people make the mistake, naturally enough, of focusing on these great big pipelines, like David does with the Trans Mountain pipeline, but especially when fracking is concerned, what they don't think about is all the little pipes, because every one of these wellheads, they have little pipes that are running here, there, and everywhere, bringing this stuff up from the surface And a lot of these stuff, they'll break, they'll leak, they'll crack, they'll get left behind when the job is done and just remain oozing into the environment, you know. So while everyone's looking at tanker traffic and these great big pipelines, you know, the major pipes, a lot of this other stuff is in the environment as well, and it's being, you know, overlooked.
We are under a massive corporate attack, and obviously they're willing to poison us because that's what they're doing with fracking. There's no question about it. I mean, they do it with genetically engineered foods, they do it with the pesticides, they do it with the crap they put into all of our foods in so many ways.
Fish farms.
Fish farms. I mean,
well, there's one thing, you know, like there is a way, and Greg reminded me of this too. He says, I mean, in this country, we've got financial assurance for environmental risks, right? And this is where you make companies put up money up front, right? If your project is so safe, Enbridge, okay, then you put up the amount of money that you're going to have to spend to fix a big spill. Put it up front. And they've got limits right now, but if we could lift those limits and say, you know, make them come up with...
but how can we when they own all the politicians and they own the
Well.
media? That's our problem. I mean, you know, we're really at the bottom. We've got to build democratic processes. We've got to get control of our politicians, and we've got to have a media.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
PacificFreePress.com.
That's right. Yeah, and guerrillaradioblog.blogspot.ca.
Say that one more time.
Guerrillaradioblog.blogspot.ca.
And
It's
Guerrilla
my show,
is
Guerrilla Radio, of course, at CFUV.
G-O-R-I.
Yeah, Gorilla the ape. Yeah, the great ape.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Mazen Al-Nahawi. Mazen is a Palestinian refugee from Syria, and you were trained in university there as a drama critic and linguist. And maybe you can just mention the name of the school.
It's the High Institute of Drama and Literature in Damascus, and from the criticism department.
So let's go. I know you've got a few things you'd like to...
Thanks again for having me, Jack. We talked before about the same issue, the Palestinian struggle for what happened in Palestine, and especially now with the visit of Harper to Jerusalem and meeting the Netanyahu and all the talk. I want to just first to bring some background about my family. It's who moved to Palestine in the middle of the 15th century, and they moved just from like as you're moving from Nanaimo to Victoria. It's a short distance from what is now Syria to what is now it's Palestine, or has the name of Israel. But in 1948, and I don't know if people can to imagine that to lose all your history in that land, lose your home, lose your properties, lose your relationship with friends, community, the whole that life disappeared in 1948. Above that, for us as a Palestinian, and that is not heaven only to my family, this is heaven at that time for at least for 800,000 Palestinian refugees. Like it was more than the half of population of Palestine. Imagine expelling the half of population of Canada in a matter of 2 years. And then demand from this population not to resist or even talk about the state which expelled them from their land. Based on Mr. Harper, if I talk against the Zionist state which expelled my family and make a lot of people refugees, if I talk about that state, I am attacking Jews.
That's what Mr. Harper says.
Yes,
If you
in his
attack,
visit,
if you
yes.
criticize Israel, you're being anti-Semitic. Yeah.
Exactly. I will talk later about the word Semitic because it kind of, the term itself is manipulated. But the idea that it's the Jewish independent voices, actually, they mention a great point that considering the evangelical base of Harper and their view about the second coming and bringing back all the Jews to Palestine to hurry up with the second coming of Jesus and the Armageddon, they are the ones who are really anti-Semitic because they don't want their Canadian citizens who are Jews to be in Canada. They have to go to Palestine or Israel to based on the biblical mythology of the evangelical. We can add to that also the history past of the Canadian state, who closed their door to the Jewish refugees during the Holocaust in Europe. So the same state.
That's right. That's worth mentioning, as Mr. Harper is in Israel, that during World War II, Canada closed its borders to Jews trying to escape from the Nazis, and in fact, Canada sent them back to be killed.
And that was for the sake to create that Zion state. Has nothing to deal with now the same reason exists, but now because they love Jews. I mean, it's not for it's really awkward. But there is I would like to mention here a quote by Herzl, who is one of the most prominent Zionists. Actually, he is the godfather of the whole Zionist project.
And this is Theodor Herzl.
Herzl.
Who's a very famous name in Israel and the world and the Zionist world.
He said exactly these words in his diary. It said, "It is essential that the suffering of Jews become worse. This will assist in the realization of our plans. I have an excellent plan. I shall induce anti-Semites to liquidate Jewish wealth. The anti-Semites will assist us thereby in that they will strengthen the persecution and oppression of Jews."
Now, Herzl is one of the founders of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what he's saying here is he wants, and you know, if you're a Machiavellian type of politician, this is how you think, that if you make it worse for the Jews in Europe, and to make sure they're not allowed to escape to, for example, North America, but they know they're going to be killed by the Nazis in Europe, then of course they have to go to Palestine. There's nowhere else left.
Exactly.
And that was the kind of manipulation that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously very, very powerful forces making this happen.
Yes, there is. It could be in a front. We can see that the Zionist movement could take the front of all that, but I believe the Zionist movement it's a small player in all that also. It's mainly goes back to the imperial power, Western power, like Britain and now U.S., who use this outpost colonial settler state in the Middle East, or what I will call the East of Mediterranean, to keep that region in turmoil and war and divided, because it's not organic part. I mean, it's a colonial settler state. The Palestinians, in spite of all their plight and misery and tragedy, they were able, like any other indigenous population, to see the real nature of this colonization. Like how the native in the so-called America, the indigenous, and how is the native in Africa dealt with the colonial settler and knew they were a colonial settler, and coming to expel the native, take the best land, squeeze the native in an area full of trouble economically, socially, so they cannot, little by little, their whole identity will be erased and gone. That is a form of genocide. And many people, from Gandhi to Einstein and even Mandela, I mean, it's really one of the hypocrisy of the Canadian government, especially Harper, to go and talk about Mandela, and supposed to be he's talking about what Mandela did and how he taught us about resisting against for the dignity of people. He forgot that Mandela said clearly that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestinians. So, I mean, I don't know who, I mean, when the Canadian politicians come out and spread these myths about the what's happening in the Middle East without any accuracy in regard. It's similar, by the way, how they deal with the environment. Like the other show last week, you were talking about how 99% of the scientists know very well what is the issue of environment, but the Canadian government they cannot speak about it. The same thing, the same Canadian government is silencing the real history. It's just that history. It's just a biblical mythology. It's just about the Jews is returning to their homeland. I don't know.
It's interesting that when Mr. Harper goes over to the let's go back to the death of Nelson Mandela, and Stephen Harper speaks about how the connection between he trading on the name of Mr. Mandela and pretending he's one with him. But as you just mentioned, Mr. Mandela said that our freedom in South Africa is nothing without the freedom of the Palestinians. And the media's job, of course, is to never mention any of that, to allow Mr. Harper to make these comments and get away with it without ever telling Canadians the truth of what's going on. It's a historical fact that, for example, the Bush family back in the 1930s was funding the Nazis. The Nazis later pushed the Jews out of Europe under threat of death. Canada closes its borders. The United States closes its borders.
Britain
closes its borders. The Jews are forced into Palestine to create a nation that can then be manipulated by the great Western powers and, of course, the oil companies behind it all and the other corporations in order to destabilize this entire region for decades. Who benefits? Who benefits, and why don't we ever hear the truth?
It's basically the repeat of the same colonial history we have in the last couple hundred years. It's first you need to dehumanize the people, the indigenous people. They are just a bunch of savages.
Yeah.
So you have the right to go there and take whatever you want to. And if they resist, they are a terrorist. I mean, Mandela was called terrorist for a long time. He was on a list of terrorists of the American, even after he got out of prison, until I think 2006 or 8.
Long after he had been the president of South Africa, the Americans still listed him as a terrorist. And when this became public, they said, "Oh, we didn't know." They know what they're doing.
I mean, Golda Meir once said something. She said,
Golda Meir was
who was the prime minister of the first female prime minister of the Israeli occupation state. She said, "There is no such a thing as a Palestinian people. It is not as if we came and threw them out and took their country. They did not exist. It's not just you steal their land, also you say they don't exist. But fortunately, there is many other Zionists responded to these kind of claims. Like when we have, for example, Moshe Dayan. Have you heard of Moshe Dayan?
Moshe Dayan was
He is the one of
Israeli
the
general
defense, and he's one of the people who created the Haganah gangs, which later became the Israeli occupation forces, the core of it, the Israeli occupation forces. He said in 1956, that's way before BLO or Hamas even existed. He said, "Let us not today fling accusation at the murderers. What cause have we to complain about their fierce hatred to us? For 8 years now," this is in 1956, after 8 years after the 1948 Nakba, the catastrophe of expulsion of the Palestinians.
1948 was the creation of Israel.
For 8 years now, they sit in their refugee camps in Gaza, he means the Palestinians, and before very eyes, we are possessing the land and villages where they and their ancestors have lived. We are a generation of colonizers, and without the gun barrel, we cannot plant a tree and build a home.
So this is a very honest comment from one of the top Israeli generals.
But he is emphasizing here that we have to be strong. We have to be an army. We don't need to be emotional. I mean,
Okay.
so.
But he's saying that of course people are going to be angry because we've kicked them out of their homes.
Actually, more better explanation than that come from even the most criminal in the Palestinian views, Ben Gurion, who is the master plan for the whole expulsion of the
Now,
Palestinians.
David Ben Gurion was the first prime minister of
Israel,
Israel.
exactly. And by the way, if you Google Plan Dalet,
Sorry?
Plan D or Plan Dalet, Dalet it's letter D in Hebrew.
Okay.
It's the plan for the Zionists to prepare for how to deal with the Arab population, how to expel them out of their land. So just Google that and you will see the process, what they did there.
So it's Plan D-A-L-A-I-T, something like that?
Dalet,
A-D.
D-A-L-A-E-T, I think.
Okay.
He said here, Ben Gurion said, why should the Arab make peace? If I were an Arab leader, I would never make terms with Israel. That is natural. We have taken their country. Sure, God promised it to us. Here, by the way, we need to remember something. Ben Gurion was an atheist. So for an atheist to say that, sure, God promised to us, I mean, I don't know if you can see something wrong here or not. I mean, it's really, hypocrisy. I mean, for an atheist to claim that some God promised him a land. I mean, but what does that matter to them? Our God is not there. He is responding to Palestinians. We came from Israel. It's true. But 2,000 years ago, even this information, this info, it has no base of history. Himself, Ben Gurion, wrote a book in 1918. In that book, he considered the Palestinian Arab of Palestine as the flesh and the blood of the old Judeans.
So he's saying the Palestinians are
the
Jews
descendants of the Jews.
Yeah, yeah.
And stayed in the land. They might change, some of them change the religion to become a Christian or later Muslim, but did not leave their land. They stayed there. Meanwhile, the Ashkenazi European, for example, most of them are converted to Judaism. So they have no any connection with the old Hebrew or Judeans. So when he say that, but even he contradict the same lie he is using now. Anyway, he said, and what that also mattered to the Arab. I mean, there has been anti-Semitism, the Nazi, Hitler, Auschwitz, but was that their fault?
Was that the fault of the Palestinians? Yeah, no.
They only see one thing. We have come here and stolen their country. Why should they accept? Why should they accept that? They might perhaps forget in one or two generations' time, but for the moment, there is no choice. So it's simple. We have to stay strong and maintain a powerful army. Our whole policy is there. Otherwise, the Arab will wipe us out.
Mazen, thank you very much for a very interesting look at the realities of what's going on in Palestine. Mr. Harper's visit and some of the things he's saying, I mean, Canadians, I think the majority of Canadians do not support that. Harper is out of control. We have big issues that we have to face on all fronts, political, democratic, environmental. I hope we can do it because the fate of the planet is at stake. Thank you, Mazen, and thanks for watching Citizens Forum.